join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I guess I should have called to order the Port Orchard City Council's work study session. We've got a huge agenda here tonight. So when you get cranky at 9:30, remember that you have August off. So one thing quickly here, I've got secret envelopes here. You'll see that there's a new public Wi-Fi there. These are your mission assignments. They will self-destruct for 30 seconds after you open them. And that is our high-speed Wi-Fi that is the council. So we don't want to broadcast that on tape here, what the passwords are. So there it is. And then I thought it would, so the nice thing about the high-speed access is you're not going to get a pop-up once you've signed into it, as long as the passwords haven't been compromised. You will never need to change the passwords. And there's a work order out to Wave right now. The hardware is done. Wave is going to double the speed of what we currently have, but it's working properly, and I'm excited to have it. So, but then we've got a separate access point for the public here that will, once we're done with it, we'll have the legal notices pop up and what's appropriate use and so on and so forth. So, but you won't have that on your systems. All right, I thought we would jump to number 3 first and invite the two gentlemen from PSE up to the table and talk about a franchise agreement and get them on the road. So, I think that's 7B.
Yes, well, last year, we first brought this to the council that the 30-year Puget Sound Energy contract agreement, franchise agreement, was going to be expiring. We did that on the heels of the waste management contract renewal. Then we went to public properties, utilities, a couple different times. And so now this is being brought forth to this work study session. The attorney has reviewed the new version of Ordinance 1357, which was from 30 years ago. It's very similar language, new font, new margins, a little bit of language change, but in the big picture, it's really just continuation of what we've been doing with Puget Sound Energy with our franchise agreement. It has they own, operate, maintain, pull, push, remove, provide power, and tree wire, stop traffic,
Restore.
dig through sewer force mains. Anyway, no, we've had a good working relationship with Puget Sound Energy. This is just really moving this forward. So Sharon did take a look at the draft that was put together, and that's in your packet, along with the original ordinance 1357. So I guess with that, other than that great summary that I just provided, is there anything that you have to say?
My name is Tom Probst. I'm the Municipal Liaison Manager for Puget Sound Energy. It is my duty as that person to negotiate franchises with government entities that we serve. And basically a franchise agreement is the operating contract between our two organizations for how we function and work in partnership. And as Mark has already stated, it is basically the same document that we've been operating under for the past 30 years. And there hasn't been any issues that have come up in my 29 years of working in Port Orchard that have caused any difficulties with this operating procedure. So we basically presenting it, it's working fine for Puget Sound Energy, Puget Power prior to that. And so when the transition happened between Puget Power merging with Washington Natural Gas, we don't serve natural gas in Kitsap County. That's done by Cascade Natural Gas. The document basically was changed. It continued on. It's assessors and heirs. And that's why we're here today, is that the contract will expire at the September,
End of August.
I thought it was September 16th.
It's September. October 20th was the previous 30 years, so we're trying to get out ahead of this.
So if you have any questions about the contract, I'd be more than happy to entertain those.
Well, yeah, the only question I had, because obviously it is a continuation of some minor modifications, but it seems to me that when we did a different franchise, that there was a fee involved.
We get money.
But that's not specified in this agreement.
That's the
was it?
Schedule 7. Are you talking about the Schedule 74?
No,
I
there's
can't
no,
remember, it seems to me it was Casting National Gas or Wave Broadband. One of them had
I
a,
believe you lease the right of way from us, don't you?
electric utilities don't pay franchise fee.
okay, thank you, that answered
Right.
that question. Okay.
Because of the state and the federal government have deemed electric a necessity, whereas gas is not, we are required, if a customer signs up to have power from us, we have to serve them.
Okay.
So that is, the idea behind franchises was initially when they were electrifying rural America, the wisdom was, instead of having multiple sets of power lines, and they said, use the right of way. That's for commerce, and that's where franchises come from originally. And because electricity is a necessity, there is no franchise fees for counties and cities and counties. Now, we will pay for the advertising and those kinds of things that will go once you decide what to do with the franchise. Those fees we will pay for. But the city collects utility taxes. We collect utility taxes for the city.
6% on electricity, I believe.
What is Schedule 74?
Schedule 74 is a tariff that was established with the WUTC for converting overhead facilities to underground. And it is a set tariff that dictates how that, and it's basically a contract, and I used to administer those. And it's a 60-40 split. Puget Sound Energy pays 60, the city entering into that contract would pay 40, and they end up having to do trenching and restoration for the conversion of those facilities from overhead to underground. And typically they're associated with a street project, such as Tremont. So that's a project that we've entered into with the city. It's been ongoing. Once we get the funding, hopefully we'll be able to do that project.
We did when I first came here, there was a schedule, so Schedule 74 is a specific area, and we had a Schedule 74 for the downtown. It was a bit premature in that you wouldn't do a downtown unless there was actually a redevelopment plan that was moving forward. And I think there was an urge to do a Schedule 74 to get out in front of WashDOT, to get into the highway, which wasn't really the reason to do that.
Yeah.
So we were able to work out a mutual agreement to, in that Schedule 74, for the
We shrunk
portion
it
that
down.
was completed, that's now gone away. We looked at the Schedule 74 for Bay Street, haven't heard anything back. I don't think we're going to do a Schedule 74 for that. Still waiting to hear back. And then on Tremont, we have a Schedule 74 that's long overdue that we need to move forward on that. So
One of the important things about the Schedule 74 project is there has to be an underlying right. That's the franchise agreement that we have that will allow that to proceed. So if there was no franchise in place, then there's no operating right. So it's important to have the franchise. That's our operating contract between the two organizations.
And the other key thing to me for the franchise is if it's a city project, Puget Sound Energy moves facilities to make way for that project, even if they're just staying overhead. Whereas if it's a development-based condition of frontage improvement, then that's on the developer. So it's only for a city project that Puget Sound Energy will relocate facilities
At our
on Bay
cost.
Street. And then, but for a private development, yeah. So we recently had a second legal opinion confirming.
Yes.
Any questions?
Well, just a comment, I'm glad to see that the franchise that I negotiated 30 years ago
He's been waiting.
Also yourself.
That can't happen very often.
So I guess one quick question for Puget Sound Energy while we're here. So today on Sydney, I noticed that there wasn't the road closure, but there was a lane closure for the pole. I thought that was further south. It was at South Street. Were you able to get a different piece of equipment and get that pole removed without?
That's a great question.
I'd have to find
Because
out.
I just kind of went through it today, and it looked like that area that was L4 or whatever, that big pole that you needed both lanes, and it was going to put traffic out onto Tremont, and we didn't want that.
Your reader board says Sydney Road closure, which actually that's Sydney Avenue. Sydney
Yeah.
Road's out in the county.
But it just said Sydney closed, so we had a little
Okay.
bit of conversation from people from the county.
Yeah, I'll have to find out.
Anyway, so that'd be great if that bigger pole has been removed, because obviously we don't want to put traffic on Tremont from Flower
So Sydney Avenue.
Avenue.
Sydney Avenue.
And one comment we got from people from the county was, and I think we passed that on, was, the reader board has 3 lines, but I think you have 2 pages. So just that Sydney closed, rather than Sydney closed Monday or whatever, just a little more information would be awesome.
Okay.
We got a few phone calls.
But there will be a closure at some point that will take people Melcher west or one of those streets and then back in the south. Hey, this is
Pretty narrow street right there.
Construction season.
it's construction season. But it's a fairly easy detour, it brings you right back at Sydney at South. You're just going around just like our issue down at Bay Street at Tracy. It's a very easy detour, so.
Does PSE ever donate money?
Oh, the Puget Sound Energy Foundation donates millions of dollars.
Because the city has a lot of across the street holiday decorations that are falling apart, and we're faced with needing to replace those, and a donation that would allow us to go to LED would be really great. Just a suggestion.
I can certainly work with Mark on that.
Great.
Do you also sponsor events?
Do you want to sponsor?
Sponsor what? Events, and do you want naming rights?
That's this guy.
Well, as most of you know, PSE has been invested in the community for a very long time, and we've been good sponsors for many, many events, including the holiday lighting ceremony of Port Orchard for not in the last couple of years, but previously. And so we have a couple different avenues where we do support the community. The PSE Foundation is one of them, and then also approaching the company as a corporate sponsor is the other one. We are also very active members in the Port Orchard, have been a long time active member of the Port Orchard Chamber and WDA and those organizations as well. So we're very proud of that. It's a little bit more challenging to ascertain money from us nowadays, but doesn't hurt to ask. LED lights for Christmas displays are a little bit challenging, so just to warn you. So,
Thank you for the email on the rebate program you folks have for energy efficient.
oh yeah, yeah.
So helping refurbish City Hall, Puget Sound City Hall.
Well,
Stand in line, Mark.
yeah, I don't know when the last time City Hall had an energy efficiency audit, but that's one of the services that we provide to not only cities but also individuals.
Yeah,
as well.
that's through Commerce.
Nope. It's we have an engineer that works out of our Bremerton office, Jack Cipolla, who would come and do an actual audit of your facilities and make sure that you're as efficient as you can be. And then if there are upgrades that can be done, a lot of times PSE will develop specialized grants to provide rebates for that special work that's being
Yeah,
done.
we ended up entering into a contract and we got a grant, remember, to do that audit through that state entity. I can't remember what, was it Commerce or?
Probably Department of Commerce.
And they never came out.
That's Department of Commerce. Sir.
Ryan, why don't you have Jack get a hold of me?
Yes.
Love to have him come look at City Hall. We know we've got older fluorescent lights.
Well, and it's always good for him to check out your Public Works Department and operations, because your water and sewer systems, whatever you may have that's operational, there's great programs that we can provide for that as well. So,
Pumps, generators.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we have it all lined up, and I'm still waiting for the phone call.
most of our streetlights are owned by you guys, aren't they?
Yes.
Just pay you a monthly fee for them.
Yes.
Do you ever upgrade your own streetlights to
We
LED?
do all the time.
And SimWorks, we've got a grant.
2020.
Yeah. And that's a
I'm sorry?
2020, we have a grant to replace basic water lights.
All
with
street
LED.
lights in 2020.
That's through TIB.
Yeah, exactly.
So I narrowly missed the last contract negotiation 30 years ago.
Were you born yet?
And I don't have quite the solid plan that John has, thinking that I'll be here 30 years from now
I
to
won't be.
negotiate the next one. But just from a reference standpoint, what's the historical relevance of a 30-year term on that agreement such as this?
Well, it's all over the board. So, for example, the city of Bremerton, they have a charter that states that they can only enter into contracts for a period of 10 years. So they would have to change their charter in order to extend a franchise agreement with any entity in the city. So they're all 10 years. And so then as a matter of fact, we started the process with the city of Bremerton. I did, working with the city attorney, and we're on our second extension because he just doesn't have the time to allocate towards doing franchise. He has lots of other things that are going on.
And I think
So we just signed an agreement letter, and it goes for another 2 years, and we're on our second one.
And I think the length of the franchise actually is very indicative of the relationship between the utility and the city. And so when you do have a city that's willing to do a 30-year franchise, it shows that they have either enjoyed or valued the relationship, and that there haven't been any conflicts. Usually you'll find shorter-term franchises with more controversial areas or challenging areas where
I was thinking that myself.
Bainbridge is actually a 30-year, and theirs expires in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see how that negotiation goes, because they're bringing it up right now.
Yep.
Sean, and I believe, was it our Cascade Natural Gas we just did that had been a 50-year
50-year.
contract?
Yeah.
And we
That's
brought
not
it
new.
down, didn't we,
I
to
think
25
or 30, one of the two.
Yeah. Because even John wasn't here.
One of the things that the funding institutions used to look at was the term of a franchise as well. And that would help determine some of your credit rating. So if you had a 30-year operating right, that was stability. Right? So that's something that's important for both the city and Puget Sound Energy, is to have that stability, know that we have that contract in place with you. And that
We were mutually beneficial, but just was curious that.
The other part that's important to understand about this, when people start thinking about how long that contract is, it is a non-exclusive franchise, which means if something changed, you have the option to enter into a franchise with any other provider. So you're not locked in, if that's of some concern.
Other questions? Okay, we bring this back to a council meeting soon.
August or September, and have an ordinance.
Yep, as soon as it's, I think it's basically ready, other than throwing some dates on it.
Yeah, and then it has to be advertised.
Okay. So,
And we'll work with Mark to get that done.
It's going to get some staff reports and ordinances.
yeah. All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. We'd be glad to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark touched on that too, if you haven't noticed that down in Annapolis, we've got a little detour there. We had a sinkhole opened up, and,
Thank you.
I've signed an emergency work order for that. It's slightly less than $10,000, and we've got the sinkhole filled, and they're gonna be paving tomorrow, so, we were concerned about it. It was very close to our sewer force main, and so we had a steel plate over the top of it, so we didn't want that to rupture.
What cost?
I drove over that Saturday.
We know. Okay.
What,
Okay, all right, we'll move on. Doug, what do you got for sponsorships and corporate and money
I'm
for
kind of tapped
Christmas?
out. Yeah. Got some extra Christmas lights though. I got my boxes of them. So.
66?
Oh, this is Doug Price, he's our code enforcement officer for those that don't know him, and He's here to talk to us about dangerous building code.
For those of you who haven't been warned, this was my specialty for a number of years, and I like to talk about it. So, some of you already experienced that. So, just for starters, we're talking about dangerous building abatement, not public nuisance abatement. Unfortunately, Washington State is a patchwork of different provisions for all different types of nuisances and different classes of cities and jurisdictions and districts. And the provisions aren't consistent, and so unfortunately there's not one pot that you can just deal with all nuisances equally out of, at least not for our class of jurisdiction. And just for defining terms, when I'm talking about abatement, it's both talking about a physical act of removing a danger, a hazard, and also just about the enforcement process. And so, well, and dangerous, when we're talking about dangerous buildings too, it can, the first thing that comes to mind is a building that's ready to collapse. But dangerous under the code can be something that where someone has done remodel and never got permits or inspections. Because it was never inspected, we can't say that it's safe. So under the different codes, that may be unfit, unsafe, dangerous. So talking about a spectrum of conditions, and as far as the physical act of abating, not necessarily talking about going out and tearing down buildings. And just from my background, I have used abatement to get rid of, demolish, or have demolished at least 6 very bad, dilapidated, crime-ridden motels and a couple of mobile home parks that were as bad or worse. And a number of other buildings of a variety of characters. But at the same time, many of the abatements that I have done have just been boarding up, cleaning up and boarding up, cleaning up meth labs, removing a dilapidated accessory structure like a shed and boarding up a house. So not necessarily talking about going around the city and ripping buildings down, although that sometimes needs to be done. And so the important thing is to have the tools that we need if we ever need to do that. And the council may say, we don't want you tearing down buildings. But, and that's fine, but we should have the tools in place so that if it becomes necessary in the interest of public safety, we have those tools there and ready to go. And also other ways where dangerous building abatement comes in. I've also used the dangerous building abatement provisions, the codes, in areas that don't involve tearing anything down, but for instance, coupling it with business license enforcement and dealing with bars that were completely out of control and full of all kinds of unsafe wiring and so on, and crime-ridden apartment complexes similarly. And in most cases in those kinds of enforcement, for instance in the apartment complexes, we rarely had to actually close an apartment complex or even individual units, and even found that we ended up with owners putting hundreds of thousands of dollars back in deferred maintenance back into apartment complexes without raising the rents. So there's abatement is a tool that has a lot of spin-offs: economic development, community development, reinvestment. So you can see it's a big thing that I could talk about all night. So, we have a dangerous building abatement code. It's the Uniform Code for Abatement of Dangerous Buildings, shorthand is UCADB. And if we never want to actually tear anything down, or if we're not concerned about the costs of doing so, it works. It needs modifications because it's been adopted without, it's a uniform code that's been adopted without modifying it to fit Port Orchard. So it does need some modifications, but it works. And in fact, in the packet, in the list and the pictures, I've actually left in at least one building that's already gone. It was torn down by the owners about 2 or 3 months ago under an abatement order. I've got another one that I've never actually issued the abatement order, but that's been hanging over the heads of the bank and so on as they've dealt with this, and it's just been sold, and the owner's just taken out demolition permit for the house and accessory structure that are just, no question, they're tear downs.
Which one was removed from your list, you were saying?
It's 1120 Spokane, I believe, and then 1112 Sydney is the one that has demolition permits out now. Yes.
The one on Morton was recently, mostly torn down.
Mostly torn down. The house on Morton was torn down. The garage is still standing, and now that the house is down, number one, in the process, they pulled out the slab that was serving as the foundation for part of the remaining structure, and two, now we see that the fungus that ate up that house in less than 5 years extends into the garage, and so that one is still on the list. I think the owner's going to do what needs to be done, which may be tear it down. He may just have to cut several feet off of it to get past all the rot and rebuild the back end, but that one stays on the list because I'm monitoring that to make sure it gets done correctly. Some of you may have heard a previous attorney provide some advice that essentially you should never go onto a property and do an abatement because, number one, someone could get hurt and then they might sue the city. And number two, that the ideal solution is to take the owner to court. If they don't do it, have them charged with contempt of court and thrown in jail. I can tell you from personal experience that doesn't work well with someone who's a long-term resident of federal prison or of Western State Hospital or who's dead, and a variety of other circumstances. In fact, I can think of few cases where that would have worked in abatements I've been involved in. So I look to have the city have a functioning code and a functioning abatement program. And then for the guidance as to what parameters do we want to use that under. That said, the second thing I mentioned that if we're not concerned about costs, the UCADB is okay. And that's kind of the heart of what I want to focus on. Under Washington provisions, there's a Supreme Court ruling from 1971 that says that unless the legislature has given specific direct authority to a governmental unit to collect a lien with priority over, or equality to taxes and priority over other liens, you don't have it. So unless the legislator's specifically given it, you don't have it. The UCADB contains language in it that says that liens are treated that way, but the state has a separate dangerous building abatement code, RCW 3580, which is not exclusive. It's not an exclusive remedy. It states very clearly in 3580 that this doesn't preclude you from using any other legal means to abate dangerous buildings. But it's the only provision under Washington law where second-class cities, or actually where any cities, can do a dangerous building abatement and recover their costs with that lien priority. Counties can do it because amongst that myriad of nuisance code provisions that have come in over different times in history, that's been provided specifically to the county. It's not been provided to any classes of cities in explicit language that would stand up in court. So to kind of boil down a lot of what I spent a lot of time presenting a couple months ago, my recommendation to the council is that we move to a code that's modeled under the provisions of RCW 3580. And the reason is, if not, then what we're left with is either funding abatements on a case-by-case basis, or throwing small amounts every year and either use it or lose it, or but that money just gets spent and it goes away. With the abatement provisions under RCW 3580, they become equal to property taxes. They go on to the property taxes. They're collected by the county. If the lien or the property taxes are unpaid, the county does the foreclosure in time after a period of 3 years, like they do with any unpaid taxes. And the city's portion is, if there's any proceeds, the city's portion is remitted to the city. What typically has happened in my experience is that usually these properties end up in bank foreclosure somewhere in this process anyway, because they're already in trouble. And the banks typically will pay off those liens to clear them off the books before they foreclose.
They would do that under the other one too, as long as there's a lien. The only difference is I read both the chapter 1520 of the Uniform Code for Abatement, and I read RCW 35. I read the white paper that we received from the AWC, or that, anyway, it was at a conference for the attorneys.
It was some.
Yeah, the only thing that I saw different in the lien process is they both go and are assessed with the taxes. When you get your annual, is the sentence that says in the RCW 35 that the assessment shall constitute a lien against the property that would be equal to the rank with the state, county, municipal taxes.
Was my understanding that's not available to second-class cities
You need,
Under the code,
on our code.
under the uniform code.
Right.
Okay, that you have to go to R 3580 to
Yes.
do anything.
the provision is in the use.
So currently, we could only, we're at the level of mechanical because we're a second-class city. And it comes back to,
But that, okay.
one of the things we had at our conference was, the attorney
Right.
said there's no good reason to be a second-class city, but that's another issue we need to
Right.
resolve.
Yeah, the provision is clearly spelled out in the UCADB, it's just that it's not supported in the RCW, and therefore under the 1971 Supreme Court ruling, it basically wipes that out and says unless that's supported in state law. And what state law says for second-class cities is that abatements, you can abate nuisances, and you can file a lien as a special assessment. So it does say that, but nowhere in the state law does it explain what that special assessment is. If it's a special assessment like a public works special assessment, there's nowhere that that's defined, and there's no provisions that support that, and even still it doesn't give it the priority. And that's why Eric Lamb in that white paper says that even those provisions are shaky as to whether or not you can even get somewhere there. Because that's something I took another look at this evening before coming up here, just to...
But if we were a code city, then our code would allow that?
Not according to the attorneys in my previous jurisdiction. Because an optional code city does say you can have anything that's granted to any other class of municipality. And in at least one place in the RCW, it defines municipality to include counties. But our attorneys told me clearly that they don't think that that was the legislature's intent to consider, under the optional code cities, to consider municipality to include counties in that case. So that's that's getting deep into legal questions that I don't have the answers to other than what I've been advised. So that's why it's shaky. It might be possible to go the other way. Frankly, in my previous jurisdiction, the position of the attorney who created the program initially was of the opinion we do things differently in this jurisdiction, and so a lot of liens were filed as priority liens and collected as priority liens under something other than RCW 3580. Until the attorney,
So
until
it's
other
possi-
attorneys got involved.
So it's possible we would file that lien, and it would be, the other side's attorneys could dispute that lien potentially.
Yes. Yeah. So that flew for a few years until it got challenged. And likewise, some of these court cases came from City of Tacoma, where similarly they basically said, we're going to do it until someone tells us to stop. And they did until they got sued, and then they had to stop and change. And so those are some of the court rulings that we have that clarify some of this for us.
Just a couple questions. So, under the 3580 process, the appeals of a hearing examiner or officer decision, who would be the appeals commission? Would that be the...
That's one of the questions that still needs to be worked out for how we would apply that here. In my previous jurisdiction, the building official was the initial hearings officer, and then the hearing examiner took the place of the appeals commission. In some, this code is really kind of interesting in how that works, because there are some jurisdictions where the person who actually signs the initial complaint is also the one who serves as the initial hearings officer. And apparently that's okay, because it's just...
Scott, when I read 3580, 3580.031 says, whenever a local governing body of a municipality finds that one or more conditions of the character described in RC 3581 exists within the territorial limits, that governing body may adopt ordinances relating to such dwellings. And when I read this whole thing, there are a lot of, we have to create the ordinance. 3580 we don't just use. And so, right, so we have to create the ordinance, and there are many decision points, as I read it, along the way, where what we're using right now specifies 19 different reasons why a building could be unfit. And so we're going to have to create those things if we go with, that's the way I read it, if we go with the RCW.
That is correct, and with the exception that you're not recreating the wheel, because this is...
there's got to be some
this is what I've done.
standard stuff.
Yeah, this is what I've done, and so this is what I created for my previous jurisdiction. I created that code under the authority of RCW 3580. It would need some modifications for Port Orchard, but I created not only the code, but this was a complete turnkey process, and so what I have...
Who was the appeals body in that?
Hearing examiner.
Hearing examiner.
And certain things would need to be run by the attorney to assure that the legal opinion here is the same as there, because some things, like I said, there were some little bit of Wild West there. But this includes, in here I've got all of the policies, procedures, codes, the forms and documents for every department that's involved. I've got the flow chart. I created the entire process, and so it's a matter of modifying that to fit. So I have all of the decision tree and all of the flow chart and everything that's been created.
In that jurisdiction, who then is the original hearings officer or
The building official.
building official?
Which would be Nick.
Sort of.
And-
I'm not a certified building official, so it depends when you need that
Well,
qualification.
my understanding from my training is the main thing is due process. Under the RCW or under the UCADB, basically just, especially if you have a significant hearing examiner fee, a person doesn't have any appeal until they come in and spend hundreds of dollars at that point. Whereas this creates an initial informal appeal process. They get some due process right at the outset, some ability to be heard before things escalate to a higher level. It's a more cumbersome process. Frankly, I prefer the UCADB or a hybrid. If it weren't for the cost issue, the lien provision, I would say I would want to create my own hybrid process. I could go on pros and cons all night on them. But because of that financial factor, we're talking about taxpayer dollars, and to me, that's kind of the overriding. That's what tips the scales for me to come and say, I think we should go this direction.
Doug, I think I heard you say that the RCW 3580 process doesn't preclude you from using another process.
It doesn't. It's just that it's the only process under which you can reliably recover a substantial portion of your costs.
So would it be the case that in some instances you may have an idea of that the UCADB process is going to work in a particular case, but it's better to go RCW 3580 in another case, or would you want to just pick one or pick the other and stick with it?
I would think we would want to just have one. That would be partly a legal question as to whether or not that causes a problem to have those options. But I think if you're going to go one way, you go that way and stick with that.
Have you had experience with the hearing examiner being the original decision maker on order?
Honestly, in all the years I did dangerous building abatements under the UCADB or under either process, frankly, I think only 2 ever actually appealed to the hearing examiner.
What about the hearing examiner creating the original order for abatement, subject to appeal to another?
No, I've never had the hearing examiner create the original order.
So, do I understand that's what Bremerton does, for example?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know their process.
I believe they do.
Under the RCW 35, well, if they follow the 3580 process, and if the hearing examiner is their initial hearing body, then yes, they would. Because under UCADB, if I'm the enforcement officer, I write a notice in order to abate, and then they can appeal that. Under the RCW process, I write a complaint and order for the informal hearing, which is held regardless of whether anyone shows up or not. And then the hearing officer from that hearing writes the notice and order. Technically, I mean, basically it's already written, and then kind of like when you go to court, the attorney actually generally writes what's going to be the judge's findings, and it kind of works the same way here.
So in your experience, the number of times that it went to that hearing examiner appeal, if you will, was pretty...
I can think of 2 or 3 times, and in at least one of those, it was basically all he did was ask for more time. He didn't even contest it.
Is it possible that we could, just because we already have one, have our municipal court judge be that hearing?
I think
Probably
in my
a good
experience
question.
from talking with the attorneys, municipal court judges usually don't do a whole lot of land use type issues, and so this might be an area outside of their expertise.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, when Doug mentioned that when you have the administrative hearing on this, they have due process rights that comes without paying a substantial fee. And if your hearing examiner is the first stop for that, we're going to be losing money every time the hearing examiner comes out for one of these hearings.
Well, that's what made me think
Yeah.
about going to the municipal court judges, that, okay, we just put it in our calendar.
But no, I think you would have to, I don't think you would be able to do it in a regular court calendar because it's a completely different type of hearing. It's under different rules. So I think if you were to do that, it would be a matter of essentially hiring that judge as an out-of-court officer to, in a different capacity.
So the cost for hearing, could that be recovered though, under?
That's a good question, and that's one that I've heard some kind of differing legal opinions. If you're saying you're not going to charge them because that's an essential part of them having due process, but then you're later going to come back and charge them for it on that fund, does that upset that due process? There's some concerns there.
I don't think we're talking, how many years, you had 2 to the hearing examiner, I don't.
2 or 3.
think that's not gonna be our biggest expense here, it's tearing down buildings.
Yeah.
And that's, if we do that, we wanna be able to put a lien that we can perfect and collect on.
Right.
The other thing that I just want to invite this council to think about as we move forward, because as we've indicated, there are decision points along the way. And Doug has a sample ordinance, and so that's not going to be as expensive. And I was seeing a lot of attorney work, putting the entire ordinance together. But I just wanted to point out that when the committee was called Public Properties Committee, and we looked at this last fall, the attorney we had at the time, and I'm just going to read part of an email that we received from City Council at that time, and she said, "I have not used Chapter 3580 RCW, nor do I recommend this procedure. It allows abatement of an unfit dwelling without a court order. Under no circumstances would I recommend either that the city hire a contractor or the city or use city forces to enter private property to form an abatement action without a court order." As you can see, and then at the same time, the white paper that the attorney from the city of Spokane Valley, at the end in his conclusion, he writes, "Finally, while Chapter 3580 RCW authorizes abatement without obtaining a court order, as discussed below, we believe it is far safer to obtain a court order to avoid potential constitutional challenges under the Fourth Amendment." So that's just something that I think our council should be aware of and explore that as we put together our ordinance.
And honestly, I absolutely do not want to do an abatement without a warrant of abatement. The codes are silent on that, and basically what they do is they say, well, you can use any legal means. Well, basically, yeah, some jurisdictions take that to mean, oh, we can just do summary abatements. But really, if you think that further through and think that through court rulings and things like that, you need to get a warrant of abatement. And so I'm pretty sure in my ordinance for my previous jurisdiction, it clearly spells out that you go to Superior Court. It definitely spells it out in the policies. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you 100% on that.
Questions? Other questions? What's kind of,
We need to start the process, start building it.
is that kind of consensus that we want to move towards 3580?
3580, and then
From from an attorney standpoint and the workload that we have out there right now, I know Doug can probably do a lot of this. You have time to do.
Much of it's done, and I actually started it right after I started here last year, and so I've already done a lot of the plugging in Port Orchard. I would need to get with Mike Barth, our contract building official or building inspector, because he has a lot of experience in this area, and a few questions for legal, and then just the working with other departments to develop the specific process. But I think it could be done by the end of the year.
That's kind of what I was thinking. We were taking next month off. We had another full work study in September. If this came back to the work study in October, November, and we were implementing it, by the end of the year, first of the year for sure, at the latest. We kind of tend to get busy with budget there in December.
Well, November.
And November, yeah. So, I mean, if it happens, great, but realistically, if it was one of the first things we implemented in January, could be I think, a very realistic timeline.
So remaining would be just some policy questions that I've provided, and one of them is funding. We had a good discussion of that at the committee meeting, and I think, and Mr. Mayor, you suggested exactly what I was thinking at the time, which, where I was before, it was funded by a one-time allocation of $250,000. That's a big chunk. We later got a second fund of $200,000 through a federal neighborhood stimulus grant. I don't think that's probably realistic here, but possibly building a fund up by, say, $50,000 a year for a period of 5 years or something like that. It doesn't need to be an enormous fund if it's rolling over through this process. And I don't think we have the kind of problems here that I faced before. I did have the better part of probably $400,000 outstanding at one point under some very extraordinary circumstances involving $150,000 just on one piece of property. That was very extraordinary circumstances.
And in reality, in talking to the treasurer, it's technically not a revolving fund. It's managed through the budget process and fund balance. But that's technical side of it. You know, from a policy standpoint, I was hoping that we would get to a point where we're funding a chunk every year and adding to that, and then as we get maybe in time getting to, we've got fund balance of 250, you know, and so we can, you know, tackle some of these bigger issues and have the resources to do it. So, but we wouldn't get there overnight.
Well, that's planned.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you very much.
What do we do about junk cars?
Yeah, because that's not included.
I have a whole stack of code issues waiting for the council. But, yeah. And my understanding is that's all kind of on next year's agenda.
Thank you.
Didn't have that with Melcher property.
We worked with that for a number of years. It's all kinds of stuff that we try to do. They have to be licensed. Well, there's I don't know if it's still active or former cab business up on Flower Street that has 5 or 6 cars all crammed into
That's the one.
no yard.
Thomas,
Said I went by.
coming up to the hot seat. We are on to item 2, which is our well 10, well 13 discussion. So some of the utility committee have seen this already, so but I think the rest of us need to hear it firsthand.
And Randy, I sent a PowerPoint to you and Janine. She didn't hear me.
It is serious. Trust me.
Okay, for those of you that I haven't formally met, my name's Thomas Hunter. I'm the water system manager for the city. I've been here for about a year and a half now, and Mark and I have been working pretty hard on the water system over the past year and a half, and really trying to identify.
Thomas, I'm we're picking it very good here. Just throw it at you.
That'll work better. We've been working pretty hard on the water system, just trying to identify the different, some of the different issues that the city faces. We've got we're not unlike many other cities. We have an aging water system, and fortunate enough that we had secured a DWSRF loan for $6 million for the construction of well number 10, which is out off of Mitchell Point. And really today, we want to take you through kind of an internal process that we've vetted pretty extensively, and kind of bring everybody up to speed that hasn't been a utility council about what our thoughts are in the direction that we're recommending the council go. Let's see if I can navigate this somewhere here. Not sure which direction I'm going to go.
The other, probably the
Top
down
button.
button.
Down. There we go. So the project highlights, and obviously for those that are wondering a little bit, what we're talking about here today is really switching gears. We're talking about moving away from well 10 for right now and going to what the city has identified as well 13. We realize that this is a big undertaking, but through water system evaluation, specifically water quality modeling that we've looked at, we've realized that the city has some real needs moving forward, not just this year, 5 years, 10 years, but looking at the system as a whole and what it needs to look like down the road. So a little bit of history here. When well 10 was drilled, we were dealing with a very different political landscape, a very different Department of Ecology landscape. The tribes had taken a very different position back then in the early 2000s. There were a lot of different weird concepts on mitigation. Are we doing in use, in kind, in time? And there was a lot of ideas floating out there. And one of the reasons that well 10 was drilled where it was drilled was because the mitigation was zero. There was no mitigation necessary because of its relation to the inlet. In essence, mitigation is when you're pulling water out of a groundwater aquifer, you have to account for the in-stream impact that you're making, right? Because we have the Stevens treaties that say that we have to account for those. So that's kind of why well 10 is where it is. And Mark and I started looking at, man, this is a problematic site. It's problematic because the city of Port Orchard has a water system that is based off of pumps. The city's system developed as the city developed. And, back 30 years ago, it was easy to just set a pump station and just pump that water up to the next development, and that's kind of how our system has grown. That creates some serious problems for emergency services, feeding water through gravity. We're required to maintain a certain pressure setting at all times, and if we don't, we go into a cross-connection status where we could have potential backflows, and that's a huge problem. That's an effect on water quality. And well 10 being where it is, it's subject to some of those issues. Number two, the city relies right now on a pump system, which means we pay more to pump our water, 2 to 3 times to get it to the top of our pressure zone. When we look forward, over a 20-year period, the goal is that we don't have to do that anymore. Utilizing resources in our higher pressure zones are going to allow us to have a more sustainable system that's cheaper to operate and more efficient. And that's part of the larger conversation we've been having about our system. This is one piece of that. The other thing that we have now, and there was some foresight about 6 years ago for different municipalities and cities and districts, they entered into an agreement with the USGS. And they entered into an agreement to do a study that is one of a kind. It's just not around in the greater United States. I think you're going to see a lot of academic and scholarly work on the model that they created. And that was a 5-year study of over 2,900 wells, and they mapped our underground aquifers, all 4 of them. The shallow aquifer level, and then Q1, Q2, and Q3. The city now has a model that we can take 500-foot cells, and we can say, if we put a well here, what is the mitigation? Whereas traditionally, those conversations were kind of held in a back room of the Department of Ecology, and it was like a chess match of hypothetical, how much water are we really pulling out? And in a little bit, I'll go over some of the components of that USGS model, and it might shed some light as to why this well 13 component is so important from where our water is and how we get it to the citizens. The other big piece is when you have a pump system, and well 10 would be a part of that pump system, you're pumping water into a storage facility, and that storage facility isn't getting turnover as it should, so you've got aging water. When we talk about water quality modeling, we're talking about when we pull water out of the ground, how long does it take for that drop to get to your tap? Because the longer that takes, the more breakdown we have in chlorine content, the more stagnant water issues we have. We've got different components that can come out of that water. It is very important that people are building and designing systems that are based on that water quality modeling, because that's how you ensure that you're getting clean, safe drinking water to people. And not just clean, but aesthetically pleasing. That's just as important. People want to be able to turn on their tap and have a good product to come out. I mean, they pay a lot of money for those services. So what we are proposing, and we'll go through this here, is Port Orchard well number 13, which is located right next to our Cedric Reservoir. It is at our current highest pressure zone for the city, not for McCormick. McCormick, you know, the two systems aren't connected yet. More to come on that. And so we have identified an area where we've been working with our water system consultant at BHC. They've done a phenomenal job in being an asset for the city and really going above and beyond. We've also been working with Robinson Noble, our consultant hydrogeologists, in trying to identify a site that would be both feasible, but provide the water that the city desperately needs. One of the benefits to this site, it's located in an area where the city is going to see growth. We know that. The Well 10 site, we can't really build that footprint out anymore. It's already built out. There's not a huge growth expansion that's going to occur in that area. So you're kind of bringing water from an area where you don't really have the growth need. You have the need because we rely on Bremerton for some of our water. This site actually accomplishes both goals. We now have water for the entire city, dropping that using gravity through our two pressure zones, but we also have water for our growth area, which is huge. Water systems really can kind of set the tone for development sometimes because they essentially set rates and accessibility to water, and you can't develop without it. So I think that from an economic development standpoint in the city of Port Orchard, this could be a very, very huge decision. Essentially, what this project looks like, and the important thing to remember, is that we're still keeping the bones of the original DWSRF scope for the project. We see the 5 bullet points here highlighted, and in this information, this map is in your packet. If you can envision a giant aquifer underneath the city of Port Orchard, which there is, Q3, which is the Fletcher Bay Aquifer. It's 1,000 feet below sea level. At this elevation, it's between 1,500 and 1,600 feet deep. It's got a lot of water. And we'll go through the USGS stuff later that shows that. Essentially, moving your point of withdrawal from well 10 to well 13, you're not changing the aquifer that you're pulling out of. You are getting more into the middle of it, which is a good thing. But the rest of your project stays the same, which is very important for the Department of Commerce and the Department of Health, because we already had a quality ranked project. They wouldn't want to see us change that project, then have a lower rating, not be as competitive. We have started those conversations with the Department of Health informally. We've also talked with the Department of Commerce to get their comment back in hopes that if this project moves forward with a scope change, we would be ready to go, because this is going to be a little bit of a time is of the essence project. So as you can see, we're still going to be replacing and stabilizing Maple Avenue, which is very important. That's a critical water main for the city. Right now it's on the edge of what I would consider to be a ravine on Blackjack Creek. If we were to have a seismic event that was large enough, we would lose that section of that main, or high potential that we could. So that's a huge benefit to the city and retains as a part of this project. Maple Avenue will still have that construction or reconstruction continue. Our well 6 site, we'll see significant improvement there. There's a massive knoll or a hillside there that's right above where those facilities are located. That's something else that has to get removed, and that was a part of the initial scope. And then we have our well 13 site treatment. This site will get a treatment facility, an ATEC treatment facility, which is a local company. They've been around for a long time. A lot of large PUDs have used this technology. It's a pyrolusite filter. Backwashes every day for about 15 minutes, and it's extremely effective at removing manganese, which is a problem that the city's dealt with for a long time, very aesthetically displeasing. ATEC came out, ran a pilot study on a couple of our wells, and found that they were able to reduce that number to almost a level of non-detection, which is it's really incredible that we have the technology to do that. So, just kind of highlighting some of the project benefits if we were to move from 10 to 13. We're going to have better service during emergencies. We're certainly going to have drastically improved water quality. not only because of the treatment facility, but because we're allowing that water to not sit in storage reservoirs and just kind of hang out for a little while before it gets used. And we're going to reduce the overall cost of pumping for our city, which I think is huge. Not only that, but like I said, we do rely on Bremerton water supplies during, times when it's hot, times when it's flushing. Right now they're doing the box culvert work down there on by SR 166, and we've had to do a lot of jockeying and making sure that transmission mains that are getting moved are sized appropriately for the city. And it's always great to have a great working relationship with Bremerton. Ned Lever and Kathleen over there are awesome, but those need to be emergency interties, and we need to be sustainable, and it's doable, very doable with this project.
Right, sustainable versus dependent is a big difference.
Right. Here's just a brief overview. This is also in your packet if you want to take a look at it. This just kind of identifies the different components that we've looked at. When we first started this, we were up in the Caitlin Powers room, and Mark came up, and Carolyn Powers room, sorry. And Mark came up and
Too young to know Carolyn.
created a task list of this project couldn't cost more money than what we had. This project needed to have the same benefits. This project couldn't be rejected by Commerce or Department of Health. I mean, it was a pretty lengthy Fortran loop.
Defend-do loop, it's those that wrote Fortran, yeah.
We knew that it was going to be a little bit of a task, but we've had the conversations with the people that we're going to need to work with to do this, and everybody's on board. We've even met with the Department of Ecology, and I was a little surprised because the Department of Ecology typically doesn't like to give out information during those conversations. They're very guarded because they have that unique relationship with the tribes who, they like to get involved in water rights. And they basically said, look, you guys have a new USGS study. The tribes were on the technical review board for that study. Let's let that empirical data tell us what to do and go from there in terms of mitigation. And one of the exciting pieces was once we got into that model, we got some really good answers. This is a snapshot of Kitsap Peninsula's water budget. You can see here that purple line right next to the 0, that represents 5%. That is the pumping. That is how much water we withdraw from our groundwater aquifers every year. And that, I think, runs from 2005 to 2012. We don't, if you look at the red and you look at the green, the red and the blue, you're looking at recharge and you're looking at annual storage. Our pumping does not have an effect on recharge and storage in this area. We have a lot of water, especially in those deep aquifers. More importantly, you can see the correlation between green, which is in-stream flow. That's when we talk about mitigation. That in-stream flow only shows relation to recharge and storage. It does not show relation to pumping. Essentially, when it boils down to it, USGS took, and I only exerted Q3, the Fletcher Bay aquifer, the deep aquifer that we're talking about. USGS took and they looked at current recharge. And then they said if we increase pumping by 15% for all 2,900 wells in the Kitsap Peninsula area, what would the effect on in-stream flows be? That's the big question, which we could never increase the whole thing by 1,500 or 15%. But they found that in most areas, the impact was minimal. In fact, in-stream flows actually went up because a lot of that water in the deep aquifer never is going to hit those streams. So through septic systems and irrigation and all that other stuff, we actually saw an increase in in-stream flows through the model, which was calibrated based off those 2,900 wells. So our fear that the tribes would come in as they did in the past, and they wanted to get involved in water rights, we started to mitigate that fear. They sat on the technical review board. We've got this data now that supports that we've got water in the area. It's sustainable use. Has really given us the scientific basis to say, okay, we're ready to start the conversation. Getting down to the project dollars and the scheduling of this, if we were to, whether we go with well 10 or well 13, the project has to be completed by early summer of 2018. We've done some preliminary work on well 10. However, what we spent money on for well 10 has primarily been engineering for Perry Avenue road construction, which Mark and I have talked. I know Rob, you've been a part of those conversations. That would still be a project if we weren't to go with well 10, that transmission main that would run down Perry. That would just end up being a road and storm project separate from the water project. However, you know, it is important that we've already identified what the drilling schedule would be for well 13, because that hole is not drilled yet. That hole would need to start being drilled this fall, and we've been told by a well driller who's already looked into it based off of the site access. West Sound Utility District has a well in the area. It's in the same aquifer, so we're able to use that geological log to know what sort of soils we're going to hit. We have a lot of good data on the area supporting us. We feel that we can have that well in the ground quicker than a standard drilling would look, because we wouldn't need to do some of the testing and piloting that you would do if you were in the middle of nowhere and had no idea, are you going to hit salt, or you're going to hit, you know, what sort of soils you have. The existing DWSRF loan amount was $6 million, and that's the loan that we got. We currently have 5.3 available. In essence, we've expended $700,000 of that on design engineering. A lot of that design and engineering we'll still retain, because it was based off of finding a treatment plant, what sort of treatment plant are we going to use, designing it, and that sort of stuff. So a lot of this money that's been spent on engineering we're still going to use. The portion that we're not going to use for this project will just be allocated towards the road and storm project later on. I've included this that you can't see at all, but it's in your packet if you want to look through it. Pretty important figures in there that just start to break down what this project's going to cost. And if you look at the top, you can see that we did the opinion of probable costs based on well 10 versus well 13. I think that we see a significant savings in a couple of areas with well 13, just because of how it fits within our system. It's got an existing reservoir that we can tie it into, and you know, that gets back to that conversation of, if we tie it into the Sedgwick Reservoir, you know, the people around Bravo Terrace, the McDonald's area, they're going to get improved water quality, as opposed to just the people downtown. It's more of a system fit than an isolated fit. But I encourage you to look through those costs. I think that the numbers kind of speak for themselves. Kind of remembering how much we have left as far as that loan amount, and the totals there do include a 20% contingency. I feel pretty good about the probable costs for well 13. I know that on a lot of the larger portions of that work, I coordinated with BHC to actually get somebody to cost those out, not just say, well, the last time we did a retaining wall, it was 40 grand. You know, we actually looked at what those pilings cost, and so there was a lot of work vetted through there.
Jump to the bottom line, you can see $13 million cheaper than continuing the current
But
path.
a lot of the savings, or the $1 million difference, has to do with Perry,
Perry Avenue.
which we're still going to do, or have to do. It may
Not-
look different.
Not to the same scope.
Yeah.
And it's utility conflicts.
Right.
It's a,
Oh, yeah.
it's a tangled web up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the design locates were called in for Perry, it looked like South Kitsap High School had cut all their kids free for the summer with like crayons, and they just went out there and, I mean, it was gas and power and phone, and there's a lot in that road. And so, yeah, there's a lot of utility conflicts on Perry. You know, it's important to note that the conversation that we're having is a conversation about a change in philosophy through Department of Ecology and tribal interaction, and our ability to work with those agencies because we have this data now, and because it's just kind of been a regime change. You know, there's some different players at Ecology than there were even 10 years ago, and they're more open to working with municipalities to work through these issues. So
We could have continued to push well 10. We found an alignment down Perry. We ran into issues with the well that was drilled when it was originally drilled and collapsed, and we lost 400 gallons a minute from a casing size reduction. Instead of 2,000 gallons, that was 16. And then we ran into the potential blockage of the screens that we would have to put 100 grand into to rehab it. So don't think that this is an all or nothing deal where well 10's not at all feasible. It is. We can go down Perry, we could rehab well 10. This is really taking a moment in time, as Thomas was saying, and not just keep pushing something because of some really thoughts and direction from 10 years ago. That USGS model really did, it created a paradigm shift. And this is just an opportunity to say, I know that we were forced to go down there because of basically the direction at the time, but if there's a better way to serve the city for the next 100 years, this is the time to make the shift. And really that's what we set out to do. Was this is like the, that end of Phantom of the Opera. It's the point of no return. We can either
This is a classic example of value engineering. You step back and look at, is there a better way to do it?
Yeah.
And it appears with the changes in the regulation, it's opened the door on a better way to do it.
Absolutely.
And I'm impressed with, long term, it's going to save us an operational cost, i.e. reduce our pumping expenses, because we're going to be right next to the reservoir that feeds an awful lot of the city.
Well, it's also a very strategic location for a future conversation that we're going to have as the city grows. And that's the Westland Utility.
I mean, to me, that's an added benefit, but the fact is that what we set out to do when we originally started going forward with well 10, we're going to be able to accomplish that and be able to help long-term reduce our overall operating expenses because we're reducing our pumping expenses. And that's electricity.
And improve quality.
Yeah.
Well, and improve quality, I'm assuming we have a quality whatever we did with whether it's 10 or 13, but I really like it from the standpoint that it's going to reduce our operating expenses long-term, which is going to save us all as ratepayers.
Right.
Some of our zones too, we have some challenges. I know the block around Fred's and mine's home, and it gets farther up towards Division. We're at the top end of the zone that's part of downtown, and we've got marginal water pressure up at that end because it's being driven by pumps. To get our neighborhood 60 pounds of water pressure, we blow the faucets off the wall down the library because we've got to drive it up the hill. Where by taking advantage of this thing called gravity, we can control this with pressure reducing valves and not be driving stuff with pumps. So
Anytime you're talking about creating head as opposed to reducing it, to create it is $1 million. To reduce it is $100,000. I mean, that's the difference between a pump station and a PRV. So that I think that you hit the nail on the head there.
Now, this particular location, other than, and you may get into this as you continue here, because of its location and other than that little thing called Highway 16, this gets us in a better position to connect to our water system to the west, the McCormick, as it's been referred to.
there's another project coming.
Oh, I know.
That's separate from this.
I know it's separate from this, but it positions us better to be able to make that connection, I would think.
Yeah, when we looked at this, this is a part of a hydraulic analysis of the city's water system. And, if we look at McCormick developing at what we think the rate that they want to develop,
Stetson
Heights and well 13, you're now looking at essentially creating your water balance at the top of your hydraulic model and then allowing it to feed your city. And that will drastically change. It'll get us out of these shallow aquifers, which have high, hydrogen sulfide content, have high manganese content, historically can produce iron bacteria tissues. They have declining yields because of the soils that transmit through those artesian aquifers. It's really, it is. If you were to ask me in 25 years what our water system could look like, I mean, we could have a very different hydraulic and water quality built water system. And I think it's exciting that we're small enough that we can do it in a short period of time.
And when I first came here, we had an area in our water system plan called the JPA. They called it the Joint Planning Area, and that was an acronym that meant, we don't know.
Yeah.
We've since then, we've had some luck in a few projects that tumbled in, and from a sewer and water perspective, that's probably our largest future demand. And there was really no desire for the landowners to do anything. The city had no way of really providing water and sewer for that area. We lucked out with some apartments, and we now have a pump station that's sized to serve the area. We have another project that's going to rebuild the Albertsons pump station. So in 8 years, we've completely taken out of focus, into focus, the JPA for sewer. And we're doing the same thing with water. We have projects now in the pipeline that are going to provide that connection off the south side of McCormick and come down through and have a connection. And we're looking at trying to also connect down Clifton so that we would potentially have a completely looped system. And at that point, we're not buying water from Bremerton. So the JPA has gone from fuzzy to focus in a relatively short order. And this is a big piece of that.
That's right, for the Perry Avenue doesn't go away, but it does get a lot less expensive because now we're just putting storm infrastructure, a sidewalk on one side, or a curb, and we're resurfacing a street versus trying to relocate a whole bunch of utilities and put a force main down the middle of a very narrow street.
Although I think, Perry Avenue was a side benefit.
It was.
The goal here was to improve our water system and provide us the source that we could depend on.
Right. No, and Perry will still happen. We have a complete topography. We already have a 30% design for an Inwood road
This
section.
is a side benefit to what we've done to this point, but my point is that the focus of this effort was not necessarily to fix Perry, it was to fix improve our water system.
And well 10 doesn't go away. I think that's really important to note, especially if you look at the city's UGA, what that's going to look like with West Sound, what West Sound's needs are. West Sound, when I look at their water system, I see some needs down in the Watauga Beach area, and well 10 will be key for them to continue to provide service in the future to that area. So I think it's a very strategic well. I just don't think it's the well that the city needs right now. And so it's important to know we're not walking away from it. It's just, if we've got $5.3 million, how can we best spend it for the city right now? And that's really what we're proposing. So Mark and my recommendation is that the council would approve a formal scope change through DWSRF to let us proceed with the drilling of well 13. And then the rest of the project is really all within the same scope. I'm open for questions or concerns, or if you guys need more information.
You vetted all these numbers with the consultants that we have as well.
Oh yes, yeah, we've been working pretty closely for quite a while now, just trying to, started as an idea, it turned into a lengthy Fortran loop, and then we've been working through it ever since. And the consultants that we have, they've got a lot writing on this as well. So I've seen the work that they've produced, and I feel pretty confident with their numbers and what they've come up with.
And we've already, again, you approved a contract with Robinson Noble, so they've already been working on this as part of our water rights. So, it's really, we're just at this point of no return where it's time to do a scope change. It's the same loan. It's the same timeline. We think we can get it done in the timeline that's existing, but also with conversations with Commerce and Health. There's a time extension allocation in the contract that allows us to request more time. That would be something that we would request only if we got down near the end and we said, hey, we need 6 more months, and based on conversations, they're like, yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't want to go in today and ask for an extension of time. But, it's like...
At what point do you verify the potential involvement of the tribes in this decision?
Recommendation of ecology, and obviously they have more of that direct interaction. I've talked with those people, not about this project yet, but we think that ecology has the right messages. We want to have a stakeholders meeting. We're going to bring in tribes, we're going to bring in ecology, we're going to bring in water rights people, we're going to have everybody sit down at the table so everybody's on the same page. I think oftentimes you create more issues by not bringing them in right away.
No, I agree. I was just wondering, you know, at what point is, that's a kind of a critical decision point in moving forward, and I was wondering when that was going to happen.
I think that's the next step.
I would say,
So you need our blessing to move forward in this direction, and at that point, that'll give you the reason to pull this group together and sit down and talk.
exactly.
And if at any point suddenly the Fortran loop stops working,
Yeah.
go, okay, timeout.
Yeah. Essentially, Department of Commerce is who allocates the funds. Department of Health tells them whether or not to do it. Department of Health has already told us they're going to support the scope change. However, we have a close working relationship with our regional engineer. I mean, they're the person that, if we have a problem, they get involved right away. And we would have no problem shifting gears if there was an issue or,
I just did once you start drilling a hole in the ground, and all of a sudden the tribe comes in and says, no, you can't do that.
We won't drill a hole until we have everything cleared through.
Yeah.
ecology.
You convinced me on, I don't know about you guys will then
Good report.
go forward. Good job, Thomas.
Yeah, good job.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay. We are on to the draft emergency management ordinance. That was mine. Recently, Mark and I and Chief and John happened to be representing transit. We were at the EM exercise over at the Department of Emergency Management at the Readiness Center. And part of that exercise, it was pointed out to us in our group that we are the only city in the county that doesn't have code relating to emergency management. Probably one of the biggest concerns related to that is indemnification back to the state. And by having this code, if we had an emergency and we mobilized volunteers to help with the disaster, with this code, we have an indemnification to the city, the state, which then the state has liability if someone was hurt or killed. Without this code, the city's responsible. We don't have indemnification to the state. Did I explain that properly?
Yes, you did.
Okay, so we grabbed Bremerton's code, which was developed about 10 years ago, modified it to meet our needs. Mike Gordon over at DEM has reviewed this, and basically this gives us emergency management powers.
Is there cross connectivity, to use something you'd like to use, with the other jurisdictions with this ordinance? Like, so,
I already sit on the board at DEM. We have a seat at the board on DEM. I don't know why we don't. It was news to
Talking
me.
like a mutual aid agreement, John?
well, so 2.8.050 talks about composition of the council.
Yeah.
And so that suggests that that the county has got to be a player, 3.
And this already exists.
Yeah, okay, that was my question.
Yeah,
So-
that's already in place.
Have an interlocal agreement that
Yeah,
spells it out.
We're party
We're party to it, but we don't have an ordinance, our own ordinance that says that we are.
And is
Effective
there
this
ordinance,
disaster event.
Yeah.
is there ordinances, are their ordinances identical then? Is that-
This came from Bremerton.
This came from Bremerton, although I have to say that the others aren't identical.
Are not.
No.
Rob, how much do we pay into this? I saw the percentage, Do we pay
Off the
something
top.
now? We do.
We pay dues into DEM. Yeah,
Right.
and I would say county, just like CENTCOM, and it's population based.
Right, I saw that, but I just didn't know, would that change at all?
No.
No, it's the
This
same fee?
We just don't have any
Yeah.
reference in our code for this. And when we were at this DEM exercise, it was actually the Paulsbo attorney was kind of, I thought it was kind of a jab, actually. You know, Port Orchard's the only city in the county that doesn't have this code, and they're at risk for all of these things, and this is the first time I heard that we've never had this code, and I was like,
First time I'd heard of it.
yeah, so I came back and said, well, we gotta fix that, and so I called Mike and over at DEM and said, so who's got a good code? And he said Bremerton, and so, you know, got a hold of Sharon, and I said, okay, Bremerton's got a good code, let's, you know, we should maybe model ours after Bremerton, so we're not recreating the wheel. But the biggest thing is the indemnification, and so that we're not at risk financially in the event of an emergency for volunteers.
Does that reduce our exposure completely? Shifted over to the state?
It's in the state.
Yes.
Yes, in a declared emergency, correct.
One thing that jumped out at me as I read through that particular ordinance, and this is another little piece that we have, we've got kind of the, for lack of a proper term, the chain of command. It goes from the mayor to the mayor pro tem. But after mayor pro tem, we haven't established an order of who's next in charge, or whatever you want to call it.
And that's a very good point that we need to bring up here at the end of the meeting, because there's a meeting coming up very soon that the mayor and the mayor pro tem are going to be gone from. So we need
Well,
to have,
I mean,
we need to
you know,
have a mayor
that's-
pro tem for that evening, but that's a bigger issue. There should be a pecking order to that.
Granted, we have that. We have from me right down to the janitor.
But just so that you know, John, so in the event of an emergency, we do have our incident commander established, which is the police chief. And so from an emergency operations standpoint, that structure's in place for that NIMS system. As far as,
That's for the dealing with the event out on the street. But as far as who has the final say at the city, it's the mayor. If he's unavailable, it drops to the mayor pro tem. If the mayor pro tem and the mayor are both unavailable, who's next?
The next successor in line on the city council.
Yeah, exactly. So
Which isn't
if
defined.
next one that shows up, it's
So
logical that would be it.
I think that's
right?
separate from this DEM
Oh, it is.
ordinance, but you bring up a very good
Yeah.
point, which also relates to these other, you know, in an event of an absence.
I mean, you could draw straws however you want to do it, just that we've never done it.
Yeah.
Maybe you just go from position 1 to position 7,
Or who's
Whatever.
Who answers the phone?
well,
Or
it
seven to
could
one.
be that.
if it gets to me, John, if it gets to me, we're in trouble.
Mark Knowles, who answers the phone?
So
Mr.
is-
Diener's got a
is-
question.
As the county minutes duties under .160, provide office space.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
DEM,
they have it.
DEM
Okay.
facility.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, they're emergency, they're EOC.
Yeah, it's over there at the CENTCOM facility, they're all in the same building. We all, as taxpayers, have paid for it, but yes, that facility exists. So anyway, just wanted to bring this forward. It was news to me, we didn't have this section in our code, and
Sounds good, put it on the agenda.
so I think, I think Sharon's done a great job here, borrowing from one of our neighbors. Any other questions of it? Okay, it seemed pretty straightforward to me. Can I jump my demo up ahead of you? Would you mind if I did that?
Go for it.
Okay, Brandon? There's something not on the agenda. So we put I know, I'm sorry, I'm adding to the agenda. We put $40,000 this year into the budget for a website. And when Brandy and I and Beck went to the AWC conference, one sessions I sat in was on software and the computer industry. And there was a young man there, about 30, from California, that was there speaking that we should be going to cloud-based, and that whenever possible, your software should be subscription-based. And his company's called Proud City, and I thought it was like a public works. You got a brief little piece of it. Well, yesterday, Brandy and I finally had a little webinar with him, And it's much more than that. It's a website and website development. And he's developed basically a cookie cutter website for small cities. And you just plug I had Janine working on it for a half a day today to have the content that we have. It's the annual cost. So last month we had a problem with our website. It got hacked. We spent $2,000 on a repair. We have very outdated, I think, technology, and for less than $5,000, I believe we can fully implement this and customize this site. And the annual cost to it, and they provide all the support to it, is a penny a citizen. So we're looking at a little less than $1,400 a year.
Is that a new tax?
So this would be our new website, is what it would look like. And if we could have any picture there, but the neat things about it, up there in the top left corner from wherever you're at with the Port Orchard logo, that's how you come back to this home page. Scrolling down, like Randy was doing there just a moment ago, we'll have these links. If you want to use links, that search, it's in the very beginning. That's how many people now want to, So, and it's got always, so it is, you would go to the link. It's really pretty intuitive. Janine, who's the one maintaining our current system, loved this, and she had no training. She just, it landed in her lap about lunchtime today.
That's 1 cent per citizen.
No, it's
14,000
$14,000.
times 0.01.
Okay, it's $1,400 a year. I'm off. So,
Okay.
about $1,400. Okay. The content there isn't a whole lot of content in this yet, but here's the calendar.
Is there another jurisdiction that we could look at?
West, yes, there's one in Ohio. That was what Brandy was looking at there just a moment ago. So
okay.
There's theirs. It looks just like it.
Oh.
It's really just they've created this template for a city website because we all kind of have the same things: finance department, a public works department, a planning department, and
I'm assuming it's fully optimized for any sort of device.
It isn't. It works. It sizes to your device. That was one of the questions I asked. Yes. There isn't an app for it. They said there isn't a need. We do like their council. Those videos.
Right.
Did you see this video? But this is a different piece of software that they're using that records their council meetings. There in Ohio. Where ours is just it wasn't quite as cool as this, but this isn't something the website's providing. So what it is many of these links will be existing systems we have. It's just a link to, a hyperlink to that system. So like Nick right now is developing building permits web-based. So all of it, if you went into building permits, you would, it would just go to his software that's going to manage that. So, come go to the city council. I think we put a picture on ours.
Oh, per
back to
month.
ours.
Per month.
I think Janine's already got that. Yeah, we didn't have a current, so it's because we haven't taken the picture until next week. So we stole that one. And I'm sorry, John, I chopped your head off. We haven't figured out how to size things yet. We were playing with it for quite a while today. But we were really excited. Considering we thought it was going to cost us about $40,000 to redo our website, and we went to, one of the benefits of attending. That's why I'd like to get more of us to go to these conferences. That we stumbled into the ability to probably do this for less than $5,000, and we're paying currently $1,200 annually for our website, and then we're responsible for.
That's just to host it.
That's just to host it.
And this company will provide.
They hosting all of it. it's
They
all,
provide all the updates to any kind of flash software, any kind of script,
Yes.
anything like that.
everything. One of my questions was, is this sustainable? You know, they've only got 10 cities so far, and that's really, but he's created it. And I mean, I think it's a pretty small company. You know, Brandy and I are in the conference call, and then all of a sudden, the doorbell rang or something, the dogs were barking.
The double works. The total
So it
works.
was working, working from home.
The dogs
So we were
barking.
laughing, because the dogs were barking in the background.
Yeah.
But his presentation was much more polished than mine.
Good.
I mean, Brandy and I got about an hour of this yesterday. I said to him, wow, I want to run, bounce this off the council. But he says, well, I could have your test site done in 2 or 3 weeks. And I said, well, gosh, my city council meeting's tomorrow night, and we're not having one my work day's not done next month. I'll have it for you tomorrow. So an idea. We had it this morning, and by noon today, we had a user ID and password to Janine, and Janine with no training did everything that you saw here today. But it's pretty. It's got this dashboard, and it's really pretty. It looks pretty. I can't say it. It's really easy because I didn't do any of it. But Janine, I was watching Janine do it. And it was pretty slick. So. I mean, with you guys' concurrence, I think we want to at least develop the test site of this and continue to populate it. And I think this is much better than the website that we currently have, and it's very cost effective.
I think there's all kinds of technology out there, especially with mobile devices and apps. We've learned that we can take these complicated pieces of software and make them pretty straightforward. And first getting into city government, it amazed me how much city entities, municipalities pay for things that the private sector doesn't have to pay that amount of money.
That
It's
was
incredible.
The entire what I started with there, the presentation I was at was, there's a big shift in this in the software industry, and you should be looking for subscription-based software. Because he said, if a year from now, if mine isn't the best product out there, you should go get this other guy's product, because it's evolving that fast,
And I must say, he was youthful.
He was. He was.
At 30? Not in this industry, that's old.
He might have been younger than 30.
Yeah. I walked in that particular session quite late, and
What are the
They were
complaints we
kids.
hear about our current website?
Well, from the users, it's expensive. I mean, we're spending thousands of dollars
Everything's
maintaining it,
very-
repairing it. And Janine was telling me, currently, she has to use a particular piece of software, upload it to another site, then to transfer it to our site. And it's very cumbersome, and it runs into conflicts all the time. This has a dashboard built into it where she's just, there's just like your email's got the paper clip to attach the image. And
Here's where you can go in and change. This is the dashboard. You can go in and edit everything in here. You can upload the documents.
Really, and the other city, what I liked about it and what I thought I was having a presentation on was like a public works complaint system to automate it versus where we're basically using a telephone, and somebody's got to call in. Well, that's outdated. I mean, yeah, some folks want to call in, but somebody at 11 o'clock at night can, there's a dead animal out in the road, or there's a pothole out on this street, and they have the ability, to report it to us, from our website.
So is there?
Can that be done, can that be done through this website?
Yes.
When citizens take pictures and upload them,
right
say,
here.
here's my problem with my
There's
on the street.
There's a the other city, if you go back to West Carleton, so currently, they're in the process of improving this. They just basically have an online form you fill out. What wowed me at the presentation was this map thing, and it was very sophisticated. What he told me when I asked about it is that's a third-party vendor. It's about twice the cost of the website. he doesn't recommend that we pay for that service because they're going, within the next month or two, they're developing their own that will be part of this app. It may not be quite as sophisticated as the other one, but here's basically, you know, what type of complaint, and then it creates a tracking number. So it's not very, that isn't very sophisticated, but it works. There's an ability to go online. There's a link inside of it, and he said that they're constantly updating. I mean, he rolled this out, I think, within the last year.
So is there a maximum file size or upper limits to how much
We asked
we
that.
can load?
No.
We asked, that was one of Brandy's questions yesterday. She asked that question, he goes, "You'll never get close." Yeah, I mean, he kind of chuckled and said, "You'll never get close to it."
Rob, just to give you a comparison, City of Paulsbo and the City of Bainbridge Island subscribe to this online service called C-Click Fix. And it gives the resident the ability to take a photograph and send it in, and it gives them the location of the problem and a little description. It does allow you to communicate back to them. Don't write it down.
Okay.
Because I looked at it, I was looking at it for the transit. For the transit, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $35,000 a year.
Whoa.
Okay.
And it's like, there's no way in the world with today's technology.
The nice thing about this app too,
Yeah.
See, here it is
or
here.
I'm not calling it an app, or this service is, if we have a service that we like we're already accepting utility payments, we don't have to use their service. They'll just create a link to what we already have. It'll happen behind the scenes. Now, where he's really gonna want to try to make his money is customization of the site. That's gonna be on an hour. So as much as we can, because he quoted me $2,500 for the cookie cutter approach to implement this. I think we're gonna want a little bit of customization, but the more we can, roll out this cookie cutter approach, the less expensive we can make it. And it's not to say that we can't add to it later, but.
I think it's worth pursuing.
Yeah. Make
I
sure
already
you
did
have
something with both
an
feet.
events that goes right to the Festival of Chimes and Lights.
Right.
That's what I want to make sure.
Big link.
One of the features we noticed today is people from the community can upload events. So we don't have to be the gatekeeper of all of,
The
cruise.
marijuana
the cruise.
festival, yes.
Well, so we might have to create a policy to say what is appropriate, and maybe it has to be an event that's in the city limits and so on and so forth. But-
The bike ride with the nudes. I'm just saying, you might want to have to,
Can more staff
Nude
add content
the
than
nude, the nude
Who
bike
adds
ride
content
thing.
now?
Yeah.
He recommended that we only have a maximum of 2 or 3 people that are modifying the site.
You have the police, you have.
It's probably gonna be the clerk's office. They're gonna submit things. There might be things that Mark's or Nick's office that can do related to their department, but I think we want to try to control it through the clerk's office, which, that's how it's primarily done right
Does
now.
it do with?
Well, you also have a records retention issue with.
Yes, we have.
So you gotta keep control over what you're doing.
Yes.
And he did say that if it's a prescription base, so 6 months down the road where we decide that there's a new better thing in town, we can go to that new agency, and we will get all of our data, all of our makeup of the software program. It automatically goes to us at no charge, so we don't lose any of that.
So we own all the content.
Correct.
So like our minutes and stuff, are they resident on the cloud or are they resident on our server?
They're on our system right now.
They're on our
but
server.
we would be posting them on here also. That's what would.
But they're residents
So
on
the-
our server, but from the website, they're.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we upload them to this piece of software. I think really it's gonna cost us about $2,500 to start out, and some staff time for us to load the test site. We'll bring it back before we launch it, but I'd like to get some confidence, have some staff, spend some time, loading content into this, make sure that it is what we think it is, check some references on it, because it almost seems too good to be true.
Well, if you want continuity, it may be too early to tell how long he's been around, but it looks as long as it's good, easy to use and you have good navigation, I think it's worth looking into. I'm just a little hesitant because he's so new. I mean, that's good and bad. It's just that
And
government can't always use the latest, greatest software. As much as it pains me to say that, you need what's really safe and consistent and reliable.
Well, as long as we're maintaining the
A copy on
original
our servers,
record
yeah.
here,
Then what's on the cloud is just a
then
copy.
it's just, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
it's
it's not a big deal, but having what appears to be a very easy way to manage and update your content is attractive.
We could do it ourselves, virtually everything ourselves, and we're not relying on paying a third party.
And that's the same thing with our new public records request portal. We have, it's not called a dashboard, but we have the behind the scene things that we can put in those questions that we always get that will direct them to a different part of the website. This has the same feature based on, where do I make my utility payments versus I want to look for council minute records. It's the same thing. This also has a feature where you can load, which I have on the screen now. This is what West Carlton have. We'll have something similar, but we can load our contracts and deeds and easements and council agendas onto the website, and the base model will allow you to search the content of what's on the website itself, which kind of is what ours does now. But for the next level, you can also search all documents within the website. So for example, if somebody wanted to know something about the marquee, they can go in here and search marquee, and there's probably an ordinance on it or a staff report on it or something.
Than our current website.
I'm sorry?
It has a better search engine than our current website.
Yes.
Is there a limit as to how much data that we can put on this thing?
He told us we would never reach the limit.
That was.
Yeah. Whether we're uploading to the site
He
or
chuckled.
storage
He chuckled.
capacity,
He said,
yeah.
You
Both.
could never come close to reaching.
Well,
He write that
when you
down.
start putting all of our ordinances and all of our minutes and all of our video and all of our, you can start chewing up a whole lot of storage in a short
Unless
period
he's
of time.
always
So I was
becoming
wondering.
a contract, you'll never need it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd like to proceed unless you have any objections. So we're on to number 5. Mr. Diener asked that be added.
Okay, so we've adopted our comp plan. We've had input from the public, our committees, the planning commission. We adopted the planning commission's recommendation with, I think, relatively very few changes. So the question before us should be, what's next? And so I provided copies of the implementation section of the comp plan. I also provided a summary, this sheet right here, this table, summary table, of the high priorities. And so the question I'd like us to consider is, what do we do with this information now? Ideally, this is a very transparent document for indicating the direction that the council needs to be considering in terms of, did you not get one?
No.
Is it in your folder?
Where's my folder?
Mine was in the
I
folder.
picked mine up early.
Oh, okay. So, the question I think that we should be talking about is, what do we want to do with this? This is a very good section of our comp plan that tells the public what we should be working on. It doesn't get much more transparent than that in terms of advising what we should be concentrating on and budgeting for. And some of these have consistent threads amongst each other. Sudbury Plan has a lot of goals associated with that. So there's a couple alternatives, perhaps more. One is we consider additional work studies like we're doing now. Another is that we kick certain goals and objectives down to the appropriate committees and start getting some feedback on that. Looking for input.
This is your priority list here.
No, this is the comp plan's priority list. Yeah. So what I've done is I've taken what's highlighted on this document and I sort of summarized it in this table. And so if there's any mistakes, they're mine. But so the very first highlighted goal from Chapter 2, the land use chapter, is Sudbury Plan development. And the next one is development regulations.
Well, I can speak to the development regulations as we've talked about our design guidelines And economic development yesterday, we talked about the need for potentially a corridor study of downtown. So these particular items, I think, are consultant-driven, and it will be in the first draft of the mayor's budget as they're rolled out.
I don't mean to interrupt the flow, but what I was thinking is if we could think of something concrete, could you tell me where it fits into priority? For example, if we wanted to change the minimum square footage for a housing unit, would that be under land use, like number 1 or 2? And for example, if we wanted to change the types of commercial zones that we have, where would that fit on these priorities?
So the first item would, I think, fit the best under row number 2.
Okay.
But also row number 5. You talked about housing and changing the, I think you said square footage.
Yeah, if we wanted to talk about square
Right.
footage, or
Right.
for example, different types of commercial
Yeah,
zones.
what I hear the real question is what is our work plan going to be for next year? And what's the budget to support the work plan? And so to me, the question is, how are we going to come up with the process to determine that?
And when we adopted this, I think there could have been a lot more, we ran out of time, as we often do with these kinds of things. And there could have been a lot more robust discussion about, well, what does the first row on this highlighted page actually mean to us? And I think there wasn't really any discussion about, well, is this recommendation as coming from the Planning Commission a high priority? Is that our recommendation? And what I thought I heard was, well, we could look at retailoring this a bit for the next comprehensive plan update. You know, not the next 8-year update, but next year's docketed update. So I think that also needs to play into this a little bit, because this may not be the list we want to work from.
You may also just want to consider adding subtasks to each of these.
Yes,
more
exactly. Exactly. I think many of these are made up of many subtasks.
And some of it's going to relate to dollars and cents and what we have, I mean, there's things of, paying police and facilities and so on and so forth. And, some of these, the study of we know we need to do our sub-area plans, and we know we need the design standards, and which is it, we can't do it all at once.
That's kind of what I was
Right.
thinking about, is if you look at each one of these categories, it's almost to the point where we have to figure out which category is the highest priority, so that we then can break into the subtasks in that category, because, some of them, utilities kind of as a standalone, but when you get into things like land use and housing, and you can only do so much with the staff that we have and the consultants that we can afford. So which of these are the most priority?
This is almost like a retreat subject.
Well, I think the first thing would be to ask the staff
Yeah.
to
What's
which
realistic?
Right.
In time, what are we looking at? Timelines and resources
And-
is a piece of this.
And some of these are ongoing. Row 16, we just talked about tonight, water facilities planning. So
Yeah.
some of this is actually underway.
Mm-hmm.
Other rows are competing with other rows, like you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could also potentially look at assigning, years and kind of create a timeline off to the side where you kind of project out when is this project going to take place. And, maybe it's like our transportation plan, there's a 6 and there's a 20, and we have high, medium, and low priorities. And so maybe we can start to lay that out, at least for the 6-year plan.
And high was that a 1 to 5 year implementation?
It's not defined.
It wasn't defined, was it? Okay.
I can work on something along those lines and try to bring it to our, one of the committees or back to council. I think,
I think if we're going to work on a timeline, he's going to probably come back to the whole group, and probably, if we can, slightly ahead of the budget process, because it could drive the budget process.
Yeah, especially with consultants.
In particular, when we're doing a biennial budget, we're kind of locking ourselves into 2 years where our resources are going. So I mean, ideally, it'd be September or October at the latest.
Okay.
And I would also
Nice
ask
September.
that with that effort, some effort be made to educate me and others about what some of this actually means. Because, I think I know, but I'm not sure what some of this might mean in its entirety.
Well, were you also thinking that from these 18 rows, we would like pick the top 3 to 5 or something?
Well, I think that's what we're asking staff to
Okay.
consider is what would that prioritized list of high priorities look like?
Well, it looks like you picked all high priority items.
Well, I picked all that were identified.
So do they want, for example, some direction from council, which,
No, I think
Okay.
what Nick's going to try to put together, correct me if I'm wrong, is a better description of what these really mean and what they would mean from a resource standpoint and a timeline standpoint.
oh, so then we could pick the top ones.
And then we could shuffle.
Okay.
Yes.
They have a value.
Then they have a value. That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I mean, almost everything on this list is underway in some form or another. It's just, are we completing it? Are we completing that goal, or are we only working on a small piece of it? So we need to identify those pieces.
Right.
And I
Well,
very much appreciate you bringing it forward to tie in the comprehensive plan with our work plan, with our budget, so that the comprehensive plan becomes a working document for us.
Yeah, and I'll say that I do this because I've seen it fail. I saw the 2006 Kitsap County Comprehensive Plan fail. They had hundreds and hundreds of goals, policy, and objectives, and at the last minute, so many of them became high priorities that none of them were high priorities. And so it just sat on the shelf, and hopefully they've corrected that with this year. But this is supposed to be a truly useful planning document, a master plan for a community that, if we believe in, we should move forward with.
Would everybody comfortable with that as a work plan? Does Nick come back and let us know what it is we're working on? Better descriptions and timelines and costs.
Good job, Scott.
I can speak to probably the last one fairly quickly. It's, transportation, which has been primarily Tremont. Alan wanted me to share that he has notified the state to start that 6-month clock on our collection of the car tab fees. So that happened earlier in the week. We did, one of the requirements in the state law is we have to have a phone number for the TBD.
A hotline.
Or hotline, the TBD hotline. So that now.
Cell phone number?
John's number.
It is a number that rings up to at the front desk. But we have a special phone number for that.
It has a special phone number and it has a special when it rings into her main desk, it says TBD hotline. So when she answers it, she would say, "Thank you for calling the city of Literature, TBD." However she's
TBD
calling.
hotline.
Yes. So she'll be able to know right away.
Yeah, it's the bat phone hanging on the wall.
Is there a special ringtone too?
I don't know about that.
Have a red phone on your desk.
No, and then the other piece, I think it's important that Mark is working hard, trying to get the TID application complete that's due in August. And so I think we're getting close. I've seen some drafts of it floating around.
Bay Street.
And Bay Street.
We've got the segment 3 sole source to get the consultant back on board to do the segment 3 design. We've got the Universal Field Services easements on segment 3. Then we have the actual local agency agreement for the consultant to do the design work in segment 3 because the previous one expired. So there's a lot of work to do to get them going this fall so that we start construction, go out to bid in early, January, February of 2017 for segment 3. As far as Bay Street, on the federal side, we've, in essence, purchased 2 of the 5 homes. So that's moving forward.
Closed on one and the other one's close to closing.
Yeah, we're in escrow now.
Which one's that list?
The very first one we've closed on, the very last one we're in escrow on.
Are we
That's
hoping?
what's moving everything out of there.
And then on Tremont, we're pushing hard for the TID and we're hoping to award next April, award a contract next April for that. So, I mean, that's really the time
Anything else for the good of the order?
I have a question,
Okay.
and I haven't gone through page to page, but it appears that I have 2 copies of the same thing.
Yeah, one's a red lined and one's not.
Or does one have more than 6 pages and one doesn't?
I see. Thank you.
Glad we could help.
I guess I need to look at page 2.
7:30 tomorrow morning, some of us for interviews.
I mean, it was 6:30 tomorrow. At the, okay, we have 6:30.
Anything else for the good of the order?
6:30.
Set.
9:05, that's not too bad.
6:30.
Yeah,
6:30.
I've got it.
We accomplished a lot tonight. Thank you.
I have to be on a 6 a.m. flight tomorrow, so
You should just give it back.
Hey, John. How long are your bike racks?
I was.
how long are they?
How far are they?